Good evening, Lambda School mini bootcamp students. Welcome back. I am your instructor, Dan Frainer, as you probably all know by now. And we are on our final lesson of the mini bootcamp, lesson 12 of 12. Thanks for joining me through this journey of an introduction to web development and kind of the tools we use as web developers. These are kind of all the basic tools we use, and we're going to put them all together tonight. This is by no means the end of your journey in programming or web development or software development. This is really just a beginning. This is a primer to where you can go, and I really hope that you take this information and you go further with it. You keep on it. If you do choose to apply and join us here at Lambda School. This is a really great, beginning, a really great primer. And once you complete all these lessons, you're exactly where we want you to be as far as an introductory, as far as a student coming in. This is where we leave off and then where the full course is going to pick up. And so those of you that are joining us or plan on joining us, there's a long road ahead, and there's a lot of really awesome things we're going to work with and really cool things we do in the class. And, and eventually it leads to you becoming a full-time software engineer. That being said, I'm going to share my screen and we're going to talk about what we're doing tonight. So you see I pulled up CodePen again. I'll actually give this a name. We're going to talk about the DOM, which is acronym for Document Object Model. Before we talk about the DOM, let's do a little recap of last night's lesson. And we can let's go Replit. We can talk about a little bit about recursion again. Like I said, it's just meant to be a introduction to recursion. Recursion is a big topic, just like all of these things we talk about are pretty big topics. And so, second. It's just meant to be an introduction. It's not meant to be a full depth research into recursion and how it works and all the different use cases we have for it. Kind of just an introduction. So, we had talked about how a for loop, how it works, how it has 3 pieces of data. Well, really 4 pieces of data, right? You set a variable at the beginning. You ask for an equality statement. If that is true, then it keeps running the loop. And we do something after each loop. All right. So each time it finishes running, we do something to it. And then we have the body of our loop, which is actually what we're doing inside of the loop, right? So we can see that if we have something like console log I starts at 1. And as long as it's less than 11, it'll do it. We'll see we have a loop that prints out 1 through 10. So we learned that recursion works in kind of the same way, right? We have our initial value, which I've just put as I. This can be anything. And then we ask it an if statement. If I is less than... I want to say if I is greater than 10, because that's the one difference between a recursive function and a loop is that we're going to run until this is true, where we run until this is false. So that's the one difference there. And then we're going to return. Otherwise, we are going to, let's get rid of that stuff, say console log I. And then we found out that since a function is essentially just a variable, we can call it, and especially within the function scope, it has access to everything outside of this function scope, including itself. So we can call my func, and then we're going to do this part of it, right? So let's just say I++. And then we'll see what happens there. We need to run it. And, oop, that is an infinite loop. All right. See, I+1. Still an infinite loop. Let's see. Return I+1. If I is greater than 10, return console log I. Well, take me a moment to figure out where this is breaking at, but yeah, that's kind of just an overview of recursion there. We just see that it works as a loop. Unfortunately, I wrote an infinite loop here. We had undefined to begin with. Because we didn't define anything. That's why. We have to set our initial variable. There we go. And now we see 1 through 10. All right, so that's recursion. There were a couple of problems last night to work through it. Factorials, which was pretty similar to this, and Fibonacci, which is a little more advanced. You probably had to go do some research on the Fibonacci sequence, kind of maybe look at a recursive example of it to understand it. And like we said, this is really just the beginning of your understanding of recursion, just an introduction to it. If you are joining us in the full class, we go much deeper into recursion and deeper into all of these concepts and get much more advanced with it. Yeah. Tonight we're going to talk about the DOM and what it is, and we're going to put all of our learnings together, right? We're going to do, we started this class talking about HTML. Well, we started talking about Get and GitHub, but our second lesson was on HTML and CSS. We had some CSS positioning stuff, which I've used Flexbox here. And then we went into JavaScript. And now you're probably thinking, like, what does JavaScript have anything to do with HTML and CSS? Why is this part of a web development kind of curriculum? How do we link this all together? And that's what tonight's lesson is all about, is linking it all together and getting it all to work harmoniously with each other, and creating a web application. And so tonight's assignment, the last assignment, is actually going to be step through using all the stuff we're going to learn tonight. And you're actually going to create a working web application when you're finished with it. So tonight we're going to talk about a quick introduction to the DOM itself. We're going to talk about how to include JavaScript in our HTML using the script element. We're going to talk about a built-in JavaScript object called document. We're going to go over how we use JavaScript to select elements on a page and then manipulate them, how we want them to appear. And then we're going to talk about event handlers, which is really the core of why we use JavaScript, is to listen for events like clicks and mouse enters and keyboard strokes and things like that to get things to change dynamically as our user uses our site. So first, let's talk about the DOM and what it is. The DOM, D-O-M, you'll repeatedly hear it called, it refers to Document Object Model. And when a browser loads a web page, let's just open this up for you to see. It looks over all of your HTML and it parses through it, and it creates a JavaScript object with all of your HTML in it and all of the kind of styles and what you want to appear. Then it uses that to draw what appears on your screen here. And so it creates an object model of your HTML, and it's called the DOM. And using JavaScript, we can access that object and we can manipulate the individual items within the DOM. We can add elements, remove them. We can change the attributes like the color or border, the styling. We can change, if we have an image, we can change what the image is, things like that. We can really do anything we want to the page using JavaScript. And so that's kind of what this lesson is all about, is using JavaScript to access and manipulate the DOM to create a dynamic site. Once again, if you guys are joining me live, please post any questions you have into the questions channel on Slack. There is a lesson 12, just as there's a lesson, every lesson we have, there's a separate channel for each lesson. If you're working on any of your homework assignments, go into those lesson channels and ask for help in there if you've got stuck on something. I know we've got Frank and Thomas are always hanging out. I'm in and out. And there's a whole bunch of students that have done this. We have current Lambda students that are just helping out and just willing to listen to any issues you have and help out. So make sure that you hop into those channels and ask for help if you need any help. One thing I want to go over before we really get started, there is no time limit on if you're going to complete this work. That's not due tonight at midnight or something like that. If you are joining us for the full-time program, Karen or our admissions staff will give you a deadline when you have to have the pre-course work done, which this is the pre-course work for you. So they'll give you a separate deadline. I don't want you to feel rushed that you didn't finish lesson 10 and now we're on lesson 12. Just go along with this, watch this lesson, go back and work on your assignments, and just know that all of these lessons are recorded and available on YouTube. And you can go back and watch them anytime and work on these assignments at your pace. Cool. So let's talk about, now that we know what the DOM is, and we can see here, if we open up our developer tools on our browser, we go to our elements. We can kind of see how our page is laid out here, right? We have our HTML. Inside of it, we have our head and our body. There's a bunch of stuff here because CodePen has their own code that we're running code inside of. So it's a little crazy on theirs. But if you were just to open up your own, you would see all the HTML tags you wrote. And this is what this is that this is the browser displaying its interpretation of the DOM to you. So let's start from the beginning here. And let's type HTML, head. We'll do a body. And we're going to transport this code into our body, just like we would in a regular HTML page. Let's get this formatted correctly. That's fine like that. We'll put that as a child. And if you remember, I talked about formatting is important in readability of your code. So make sure that you're using indentions to designate children in your HTML and your JavaScript. So first things first, we want to use JavaScript with our HTML file. And we need some way of telling our browser that the code we're about to give it is JavaScript. So JavaScript was originally written for use in a browser, for use in an HTML page. And when they introduced it, they also introduced the script tag for in HTML. So if you are wanting to include JavaScript in your HTML, inside of your head, you're going to, let's just write it out, you're going to include a script tag. What this is doing is this is telling your browser, as it parses all of this HTML, that what's in between these two items right here is going to be JavaScript. Now, original HTML specifications were made so that you could, they thought that there might be other scripting languages that might come up that takes the place of JavaScript or has a different use. So far, that hasn't happened. And so We'll see in just a moment that you can include like what kind it is. But for now, just know that your browser is going to interpret that as JavaScript. So now that we have a script tag, now we can enter whatever JavaScript we want in there. Let's open our console. Here, this is just a little virtual console inside of CodePen. And we're going to say console.log in the script tag. Now we see that that's printing out, right? So now we're actually including JavaScript. Console.log is JavaScript, right? Let's do some other JavaScript stuff. Const first name equals Dan. And now we'll just put my first name in. So now we can see that we can actually write JavaScript inside of our HTML. So this is fine if you want to include a couple lines of JavaScript here and there. But there's something that we like in the software engineering world called separation of concerns. We want our HTML to be inside of our HTML file. We want our CSS to be inside of our CSS file. And we want our JavaScript to be inside of our JavaScript file, right? And so we don't want to write a whole lot of JavaScript right inside of our HTML. It gets confusing. We talk about the readability of our code and how we want to be able to leave code for developers to use in the future, and we don't want them to have to go scrambling around trying to find out where the JavaScript you wrote is. We want to know that it's in the JavaScript file. So we can use the script tag to include a JavaScript file, just the same as we used a link tag with CSS. Well, we got the whole thing there for us to include a separate CSS file. File.css. We can include the script tag to bring in a separate JavaScript file. And to do that, what we're going to do is explicitly tell it that we want a type of text JavaScript. This might not be necessary in your state-of-the-art browser. You're using the latest Google Chrome. It's going to read script and know that it means JavaScript. We include this because we need to support old browsers as well. And so maybe like IE9 doesn't recognize script tags as JavaScript. We just put that there just as kind of a fail-safe, right? Just to tell the browser that what we're about to give it, the file we're about to give it is JavaScript. We give it a source. Just like when we're giving an image a source for the image, we need to give our script tag a source for the JavaScript. Now, if we remember back to our link tag, we had href was the location of our CSS file, and source is the location of our JavaScript file. These things are gonna, you're not gonna know which one is which. You're gonna have to look up the documentation sometimes. Even professional developers, and they're including a link tag, they're like, is that source or href? I'm not sure. So look up the documentation if you're not sure, if it's not working. And then we include, usually we're going to have the JavaScript file. We'll just say it's in the same file as our HTML. So you give it a dot and a /, and we say index.js is the kind of a generic intro JavaScript file. So one thing I want to point out about the script tag is that you have to put the closing script tag on there in order for it to load. Oh, and I'll tell you one more thing. We're going to write async here. This is a new HTML5 feature, but this is telling the browser to load the HTML and then load the JavaScript. Otherwise, it'll load this JavaScript. It's not going to find what you're looking for. It'll break. So make sure you include that async tag there. Cool. So now that we have JavaScript inside of our HTML file, I'm going to delete all this because CodePen does that for us already. a stickler for the correct indentions. All right. So we've got our HTML here, which is a div with a class of parent. We've got a paragraph tag inside of that div with a class of child. And that's all we got. We have some text inside of the paragraph tag. In our CSS, we can see that we have given our parent div, a width and a height, a background, a border. I've made it a flex box so that I can center this text in there perfectly. So justify content align items are center. We learned about that in lesson 3. And then I gave our child a font size of 34 pixels. Cool. So this really represents our 3 files here, our HTML file, our CSS file, and our JavaScript file. And so let's just type something into our JavaScript file. Hi there. And we should see hi there. So now we know our JavaScript is working. It's linked up to our page. We can use it. So the first thing I want to talk about is something called the document. And unfortunately, CodePen doesn't let us view the document on their console. But when you load JavaScript in a web browser, you have a global object called the document. And what the document is it is your JavaScript DOM. It is the document object model as an object. And we can see that when I ask for it, we open it up, and we can see all of our HTML is in there. This is our document. This is our DOM here. It's the document. And I mean, we could console log that if we want, but we just asked for it and it gave it to us. There we go. So there's our document there. This is an HTML representation of our DOM, but this is our DOM. So we know that we have access to the entire DOM straight off the bat. So now that we have access to the DOM has, and the document object itself has dozens and dozens of methods and properties built onto it to allow us to select elements on a page, to manipulate the elements once we select them, to add listeners and things like that. So let's go through a few of them right now. So the first thing we're going to do, that got a little crazy. We're going to talk about the 5 ways to select an element. And I'm going to kind of move through this fast because we don't have a lot of time, but all of these are on the README for the lesson. And also, there's a lot of information with the DOM and how to manipulate the DOM. And this is a great time to start digging into documents or documentation. Look up, like, oh, I know that there's a way to do it this way. Let me look it up. And then you'll find it online. But all of this data that I'm going to give you, all this information tonight, is going to be inside of our README. So there are 4 or 5 ways, essentially, to select an element. So we can see we have this element right here, this div. It's on our page. First, we're going to call our document, all right? And then we know that the document object has methods on it. And the first method we're going to talk about is get elements by class name, the long method name. And actually, I'm going to put 2 of these on there. And I'm going to change that to an ID. I'm going to put some more. I got to change our selector here to an ID selector. Okay. Oops. Okay, whatever. I want to make that smaller. Okay. PX solid black. All right, we can see we have 2 paragraph tags on there right now. Some text and some more text. So the first thing we're going to talk about is get elements by class name and get elements by ID name. So get elements by class name is going to look through your entire DOM, find all of the elements on the DOM with that class name, put them in an array, and give you that array back. So let's go const class names, and we're going to give that the class name of child. It's going to take a string of the class name you're looking for. Now, I just want to point out that this is very case sensitive. So if you have something like that and you're wondering why it's not working, it's because you need a capital N there. Like I said, there's going to be a lot of the stuff that you're going to have to go back and look up as you're using it, and that's the everyday life of a developer, is having to look that up. So we can see here that it says get elements by class name. We know that since there's an S on there, it's going to go find multiple elements that we know it's going to give it to us in an array, even if it's one item, which this won't be. We'll see. Names. Come on. There we go. So now we can see it gives us an array. There's two items in it. There's a paragraph with the class of child, and there's a paragraph with the class of child. And we open that up, and now look at this. If I hover over each of these, it's going to go to each one, right? Those are the items on our DOM there. So it's going to give us an array. Always remember that it gives you an array. So when you want to affect items on there, you have to remember that it comes in an array. The next we're going to use is going to be, we won't call that class names anymore. We're going to call it IDs. And instead of get elements by class name, we're going to call it get element by ID. And it's going to say, I have no idea what, there's no item with an ID of child, but we'll get that in just a moment. All right. Now, oh, there it gives us the whole thing, right? Now when we get element by ID, it's only going to get the first element it finds with that ID, because that's how IDs should work. You should only have one element with that ID on your DOM. So it's going to give you that one element back, and we can see if we hover over it, it picks that whole element, and we can see all of our HTML in there. So that's get element by class name and get element by ID. The newer versions of those are called query selectors. And query selectors allows us to use CSS style selectors, right? So we know that in CSS, if we want to select an ID, we give it that hash symbol, that pound sign. If we want to select a child, we give it the dot. If we want to select an element of a certain type, we just write the type on there. So I'll give you kind of a hint on here. Query selector works just like get element by ID in that it's going to find the first item that matches that query. So in this case, let's give it parent. Now we can see it pulls up that first parent. If we give it the class of child, it's only going to give us that first child back, right? So just know that query selector is only going to give us the first item it finds that matches that. If we want to do it kind of like in the same way that we do get elements by class name, we can say query selector all. And query selector all is going to give us an array. It's always going to give us an array back with all of the items that match that selector, right? So we can see that we have, let's do this again. Oop. Nothing in there. This thing is a child. There we go. So now we can see that we have both of our children in here, and we can change this to P to get all of the paragraph tags, and we'll see that we have both of those paragraph tags in there. We can change that to div to get all of the divs. And we'll see that we have we only have one item, but we have an array with that in it, right? So that's how query selector and query selector all work. Our fifth way is kind of not a way to select an item on the screen, but to create an item to manipulate and then to eventually add to the screen, which we'll do in just a bit. And that's create element. Create element. Oh, yeah. So what this does is it creates an element of the type that we ask it to create, and it just gives it to us. It's a plain basic element that's living out in JavaScript land. And we can see here that it's just a plain div. There's nothing inside of it. There's nothing to go onto it yet. We'll add some stuff in just a moment. So that's how our 5 element selectors work. Let's go, instead of create element, let's go query selector. I wanted to give me the first paragraph element it finds. Okay, and we're going to say that is just called P element, PL. And so we can see that we type PL, we get that first one. So now let's talk about properties and methods we can use on elements. And actually, I'm going to delete the other one so we have a little bit more room out there to show you. So we have one paragraph element out there with some text in it. And now that we have it selected, now we can do stuff like ask it for properties. We can ask it for the inner HTML. And remember, all of these are case sensitive. So I ask it for some inner HTML, and it gives me the inner HTML. I can get what it says in there by just asking for it, and also, just like an object in JavaScript, I can assign it to something new. Let's say something new. And we'll see that it's changed to something new right on the screen there. So with the inner HTML, if you just ask for it, it gives you what's inside of your element, which is some text here. Or we can use the single equals, which is an assignment operator, to assign it to something new, just like we've done here. The next item we're going to talk about is the attribute. And let's see if I can pull up alt. I'm going to write an image. I'm going to hope that this works. On pixel.com. This is just kind of a... There we go. All right, we have an image there. A boy playing baseball. And so there's our image. We can, let's say we're going to go image. Well, go image. That does not work to change that. All right, we got a black image there. So now we can use something called set attribute. And we can change our attribute. We want to give it the attribute we want to change, which is source. And then we give it what we want to change it to. Let's do 200 this time. Okay. So now we can see that we've changed, our original one was 100 by 100, and we've used set attribute to change it to a new image source. That's our attribute. That source is right there. We can also shorthand just say dot and the image source or whatever attribute we want and give it the new attribute. We can set it just like we did with the inner HTML. And now we've reset it. So let's look at that. and it's changed the attribute. We can do the same thing with style, and let's remove that. The one thing to note about the style is that the style is not changing your CSS. The style is changing an inline style, which takes precedence over all of your CSS. Just one thing to note as we go over this. And so we can say p.style, and style is actually its own object. So now that we have access to that item style, we can give it a style. We want to say border. I want that to equal 5px solid red. And now we see we've changed that border from 1px solid black to 5 pixels solid red just by using dot style and then dot and the name of the element there. Let's go. We can also get and change our class names. Let's go console log. We can see that it has a class name of child. And let's say we wanted to change that class name to child1. And that has a border of 5px solid orange and a font size of 30 pixels. So we know that we have our class name there, and we can reassign our classes. We can say, I want it to be child1. And now we saw that our child no longer was on there, and now it has the class name of child1 on there. So you're seeing here that we can really manipulate and change every item that we see on the screen. And we can add styles to it. We can change its class names. We can change its ID. We can do the same thing with ID. If this was parent, we just say, let's do this. ID is child1. There we go. We've given it an ID of child1 now. So we can see that we can manipulate all this stuff. I want to show you one last thing with these methods. Like I said, there are dozens of these properties and methods. And anything you can think of, I've included a bunch of resources at the bottom of the README for tonight's lesson. Please go through it. I know I'm running through this stuff really fast, but I kind of just wanted to show you all of the little things you can do. And we're getting to the really awesome stuff right in just a moment. So let's go create element. So now we have a new paragraph element. We can console log that. We can see that it's plain old basic paragraph element. It's nowhere on the screen. We don't see anything highlighted on the screen. So now we can use, now that we have this element selected, this new one, we can do stuff like inner HTML. We can say new element. We can give it an ID of child1. We can give it a class if we wanted to. We can, set an attribute. We could give it style if we wanted to. Let's go p.style.background equals, we have orange. Let's just do red. It'll be really wild. So now we have this element just floating in space. It has inner HTML. It's got an ID on it. It's got some style background to it. Now we can use something called append child. So let's grab our main div parent up there, where I say div equals document dot query selector. We're going to give it the ID of parent. Now that we have this div, we can say append child. And we can pass this new element we've created into this div, and it's going to put it at the end of its children, right? So we see here that it has one child already, and this is going to put this new element at the end of all of its children. And now we can see that new element is there on the screen. And we can give it whatever classes we want. We can give it whatever style. We can give it, do anything we want using JavaScript for that child. And so you can create new elements using JavaScript and append them to the DOM. So now you might be thinking, this is cool. We can use JavaScript to change the elements on the page, but why wouldn't we just add them to the HTML before we even created the page? Why do we need to use JavaScript for this stuff? And you're absolutely correct. If you wanted there to be an element on the screen that said new element that was red and had orange around it when you loaded the page, then yeah, throw it in your HTML. There is no reason to use JavaScript to create elements and do stuff like that to it, unless we wanted to create a dynamic page that interacted with your user, that looked for things like mouse clicks and keystrokes and hovers and entrance. If your mouse goes over the if it goes over the element, then you want it to do something. Like look at anything like we have here. We have hover over these, and they're changing the color of it. Changes the color of so much. Anytime you click on a button on a website, that's JavaScript. You get any interaction whatsoever with a website or an application online, that's all JavaScript working for you. And it's using something we call an event listener. An event listener is a function that fires when an event occurs. So we set a listener onto an item, and we give it a callback function. And then when it's going to listen and listen and listen, we're going to say, listen for a click. And when it sees that click, then it's going to fire that callback function. And so that's how we get awesome interaction. So let's do this. I'm going to show you, let's grab once the child. We're going to call that p new. Child is document dot query selector, and we're just going to get the first item in there. And so now we have access to our new paragraph. We have access to the paragraph element that's on the screen, which is that, and we have access to that div, which is the parent element of everything. So now we're going to put an event listener on the div. So we have a couple of different ways. Click has its own method called onClick, and we can just set that to a function that does callback stuff. But the preferred way of doing it is to use something called add event listener. Add event listener. And an event listener is a method, and this method takes two arguments. The first argument is the event you're listening for. So let's say click is the event we're listening for. And the second argument is our callback. And so in this callback, why don't we just console log something? This seems pretty easy. Console.log clicked. Let's clear that. Let's make this a little bit bigger. And I just want you to listen for the click. Oop. Let's go function console log clicked. Let's see if I misspelled something. All right. Where did we go wrong here? Maybe we have to return it. Maybe that's something. I'm not sure. What's this copy paste from my notes? Query selector, parent. Let's log div. He is not defined. Ah, that's why. We had a little error. So that did work. We had an error in there because I didn't change the names of everything. And now we have that. And now we have, let's clear that. And we can say, we're going to say clicked instead of mouse is entered. Well, it didn't change it, but clicked. There we go. All right. So now we see that it listens for that event and it fired that function once that click happened. Sorry about that. A little error when you live code. Anything could happen. So now we have access to do something when the click happens, right? So now we can say, what if when we clicked on this, we wanted that to disappear? Let's try it. We have access to p child. We know we have a style object that's on p child or a property. And we know we can access the display property of the style. And let's change that to none. So now when we click on this div, disappears. And we can do that with anything. What if we wanted that child to disappear and div.append child you knew to appear? All right. With that, the other one disappeared and the new one appeared. So you can see how we can use this functionality to really change anything we want on this page. We have the ability to go in and remove items, change items. We can animate items. We can change the color, the difference. There are dozens and dozens of these events that we can listen for. I kind of want to just show you. These are all the events we can listen for. Most of the time we're going to be listening for keystroke, keyboard events here. So look at all these mouse events. We'll click. Mouse up, mouse down. Like when you click down a mouse, you can do something different than when you click up a mouse. Remove your finger from the mouse. Mouse enter. We'll do a mouse enter real quick just to show you. Enter. I hope that's how you spell it. And then when you enter that, it's going to fire that. There we go. And then we can do the same exact thing except for block. Can't really remove the child right now, but we'll see that we can do different things. We can change the say div instead of this, but style background equals gray. So when we got our mouse enter, we do something. When we do our mouse exit, it does something else. Oops. Oh, mouse exit. That works if you get it right. Mouse leave is what it's called. All right. See, dozens of different listen for, and it's what really makes JavaScript and HTML and CSS work so well to each other with each other. And going through the assignment tonight, you're going to there's going to be step-by-step following instructions. Please use the README from tonight's lesson, and use the documentation and go find what the right mouse enter, mouse leave, and exactly how you should write it on all of these little, pen child and the style dot background type of thing. Oh, that's why I didn't do it. There you go. And you can create all this functionality, and we're going to just have you create this to-do list tonight, and it's going to be a working web application. And like I said, you don't have to do it tonight, but it's going to tie all of this stuff together. This is a tough assignment, but you're going to feel really accomplished once you finish it, because you're going to have something that you can show off, that you can show to people. You're like, I built this. It works. You can add items, remove items, etc. It's really awesome. And yeah, so that's it. That's kind of ties all of our material together, all HTML and CSS and JavaScript. And I'd like to thank you all for coming along on this journey with me, and I really hope you found it beneficial. And I'd love to open it up for questions. I'm seeing Brandon's getting a weird error. Brandon, how long ago did you pull down your file? So Joe asked, if we're appending children to a parent element, how do we iterate over the child elements instead of just getting them all in a single array? You can. So you get them all in a single array. Append child is essentially pushing a new child onto that children's array. It's a lot more complicated than that, but just imagine it like that. If you want all of the children of the div, you're going to have to, there probably is an MD, children. I believe you can just say children. But you're going to get an array of all the children. And so, yeah, you are going to need to then iterate over the array if you want to affect each child individually. Or you can give them IDs or classes and select them like that. I'm going to look into your issue after class, Brandon. That shouldn't be happening, but I'll look into it. Cool. Any other questions? All right, everybody. Well, I'd love to thank you for joining me this last 12 lessons, these last 3 weeks, essentially, and allowing me to be a part of your software engineering journey. I hope you would consider hanging out with us more at Lambda School and continuing this journey. But if you just continue it on your own, or you come and hang out with us, and either way, I'd love to see you progress further in software engineering. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. So just think of everything you've learned in the last 3 weeks and how much farther along you are in the last 3 weeks, and just imagine continuing that journey for the next 6 months if you come and join us at Lambda School, and being able to just think of the things you'll be able to build at the end of 6 more months now. If you are wondering what you can build at the end of 6 months, go onto our YouTube page and look up our CS1 and CS2 capstone projects. Our students are creating amazing things at the end of this course, and it's really awesome to see them start from kind of the beginnings here and end up working and doing really amazing things and getting jobs as software engineers. But I'd like to thank you for joining me, and we hope to see you guys soon. Have a good night, everyone.